So welcome. I'm Bud Riss. I'm on the board of Boston Harbor Now. I chair the Policy and Planning Committee of Boston Harbor Now. We're very happy to have Andrew Wang and Steve Faber of Related Beal joining us today about their development at 244 to 284 A Street over along Fort Point Channel. If this is your first time joining our Harbor Use Forum, welcome. If you're not familiar with Boston Harbor Now, we are an organization that's very much focused on creating an accessible and resilient waterfront for everyone. We work on harbor issues ranging from expanded ferry service to bringing underserved communities out to experience the harbor, to advocating on harbor development projects. Several members of the Boston Harbor Now staff are with us today, including Alice, who you met earlier. Hi, Alice. And Kathy Abbott, I think, is with us as well this morning. And maybe Aaron Toffler, the Director of Policy. Good morning, everyone. We convene these harbor use forums on a monthly basis. The idea is to bring people up to date on planning initiatives by the city or major development projects proposed by private property owners throughout the waterfront. We very strongly believe the waterfront belongs to everyone, and that by bringing people together with interactive conversations like this, we can help ensure that we have a better, more thoughtful and dynamic projects going forward. This particular project represents one of a series of projects along Fort Point Channel. Last December, we hosted the developers of 15 Necco Street, who are developing the property north of this site. And in April, we heard from BPDA about their work on the 100-acre open space plan. And of course, a little further down the channel, the Gillette property is the subject of a major grant from FEMA, where they will create a piece of the landscape berm that will be used to protect this entire area. So we're happy to have Steve and Andrew with us today. From our point of view at Boston Harbor Now, we're particularly interested in two aspects of these projects. One, how they can be as welcoming to everyone as possible, both in terms of the use of the exterior space and the interior spaces within these buildings. And secondly, we're interested to know how they're not only going to protect their own property, but how they will contribute to creating a contiguous line of defense along Fort Point Channel. As you know, this is one of the lowest lying areas in the city. It's a very important flood pathway for the rest of South Boston. We've had very good conversations with folks from Related Beal going back now several weeks, maybe several months. I think they do a really nice job in reaching out and creating dialogue, and hopefully we'll have a really great project at the end of this process. But I think we should get started. My apologies to everyone. I have to leave for another engagement at 9:30, but Alice will take over for me as necessary, or probably will be in charge at that point anyway. So Alice, back to you.
Thanks, Bud. I'll once again introduce our speakers from Related Beal. You'll hear today from Executive Vice President Steve Faber, as well as Andrew Wang, a Senior Project Manager of Design. And with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks. Thanks, Alice. Bud, Alice is always in charge. That's pretty clear. I want to thank everyone for being here today. We have been engaged in a very active public process. Andrew, I don't know if we have the slide early on that goes through the timing. It's been in excess of a year that we've been involved and engaged with the public, and I have to say that I really want to thank all of the stakeholders' involvement, both in the neighborhood and at city government, and certainly the staff of the BPDA. It's been a very, very positive process, and one that really has improved without question the quality of our design, and it's all been informed essentially by this process, and it continues and will continue. Today, what we're going to talk about is really, we're going to give everyone here, in case anyone here has not been involved in any one of these meetings, of which there have been many. And by the way, Zoom has actually proven to be not such a bad way of articulating, what it is that we're executing. or attempting to execute here. I think it gives everyone a much better view rather than sitting in the back of a crowded auditorium. And I think the chat functions and the question functions are serving the purpose as well of having that interaction and interactive group thinking, which is important to those types of meetings. So please, as Alice has stated, we want this to be more conversational. This isn't just a presentation. We certainly want to provide you with information, but we also want your feedback on a real-time basis, and we'll be happy to engage that, as we go. So you're going to hear an overview of the project first, kind of step by step through each of what we have considered to be very important aspects of it. Everything from, and then with a final focus, which really was the focus of our last public meeting on facilities of public accommodation, which are the areas on the ground floor of the building that, as a result of Chapter 91, are required to be open to the public, and what our vision is for some of those uses, as well as, our history with other projects. And then also Watersheet Activation, which we know is important, obviously, to this constituency that is here today. So with that, I'd like to turn over the first part of the project to Andrew to kind of give you the overview of what we've been presenting to date. Thank you again for your participation.
Hey, Stephen,
yes.
This is Bud. I wonder if I could interrupt with just one quick question for you, because I think
Sure.
A lot of people are probably wondering, we'd love to hear your perspective of a developer like you, given where we are in the pandemic, how you sort of view this playing out. I mean, it sort of seems like in this project, just to set a little context here, that you're hoping to keep going forward, and by the time that we've got a vaccine or whatever we need to get through this pandemic, construction will start and things go back to normal. Sort of, how do you view this playing out? If I just might get a little context.
Sure, Bud. Look, I guess the good news is, we are an active developer today, and we are constructing buildings right now through the pandemic. We're allowed to do it. We're doing it safely. We're doing it responsibly. All of our construction teams are adhering to very specific protocols relative to how we execute, that work. The bottom line is we expect to, keep going and to execute, on these projects. One might have to consider market considerations as to what is the state of the market, what is the demand for, whether it be residential space, office space, or lab. I can tell you that, we're comfortable with what we believe to be the unique location and opportunity of this particular development, such that, by moving forward with it, that we will have significant interest in all three of those categories. Obviously, we will, at the time that we are actually going to be going in the ground, we'll have to get, construction financing. We will certainly be prepared to put up a substantial portion of equity, which is, market and required to do this. We have that equity in place today and ready to go. And hopefully the construction financing will also be available. I'm very confident that from the standpoint of the life science portion of this project, that will not be an issue, as the life science industry, which we should be very, very, all of us here in Boston, very thankful that we are the #1 life science capital of the world. And, that is actually growing. And there's been really no pulling back essentially in companies' interest in growing. If anything, the amount of money that's flowing into that industry is actually growing. And I love a business plan when it basically says who wants to live a longer, more productive life. So we expect that portion of the project, absolutely no question, will advance as quickly as we can do it. We love the residential here. We think it is a great mix, adding to a very vibrant location of the city, and a great place to live. We've got a brand new park, we've got the Harbor Walk, all of that coming together. Our ground floor uses, we expect to engage and create a 24-hour life here. So we don't expect that to be a challenge. And the office, that's going to be the big question as to, are companies now coming back? At what rate are they coming back? To what extent does work from home continue? And if so, is there going to be, that significant demand that we expect for our product, despite the fact that there may be higher vacancies around the city? So I hope that answers your question, Bud, and
I think
certainly a good one.
That's very helpful to get started. Thank you.
Good. All right. Andrew, take it away.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here. Just to put a finer point on this timeline, this really shows our process since we started back in June last year. And the top row really shows all the pieces that we've been working on with the BPDA. We recently had our virtual meeting on October 20th, and coming up is an IAG meeting with the IAG. At the bottom is the community process. And so what I like about this graphic is it shows a balance that we are being very transparent and open, and having these different forums such as today to hear your input as well as the city's process. So with that, let me change. Okay. So I think people know the site. We're sitting here right here along A Street, along the channel, very prominent piece of land. This is an amazing opportunity with about 6.5 acres of what's today impervious parking lot, a lot of hardtop, about 810 parking spaces. So you can see the convention center in the background, and of course the Fort Point Channel and the Harbor Walk with this little outfall notch. We begin the project by thinking of the site parameters. And the biggest one really driving this, no pun intended, is the I-90 tunnel, which sits about 10 feet below the surface of the lot today. This sets up obviously some engineering challenges that we are adhering to, as well as some permitting challenges. And so that is really guiding a lot of the design and the planning for this. The other part of the planning, of course, began over 20 years ago with the 100-acre PDA plan, some of you may be familiar with. And this was really the city's vision for how this whole district could be developed in a very intelligent and thoughtful manner. The notable piece for this plan is this amazing piece of open space here spanning from the channel through the site, across A Street down to the convention center, and this Fort Point Park, west and east, is really guiding a lot of the decisions as well on our property. Our property is on parcels G4, 5, and 6. And so some of the goals here, very quickly, just are kind of very high level in terms of trying to achieve increased open space. We have an amazing opportunity to develop and improve the public realm. We are dealing with resiliency. That this area we know is subject to great flooding and for stormwater events, as well as sea level rise. We'll also be reviewing what the appropriate program is and the massing is, as well as the architectural design. And of course, with all our projects in terms of sustainability, making sure that our projects are sustainable for the future. So with open space, on the left shows the 100-acre master plan with this big open space green that's planned as part of that PDA. What we've done, you'll see in the next few slides, is improve upon that. This central open space here is now conceived of it as a destination park. So we've actually physically enlarged this. Excuse me, a little more detail on that. So to the left, that park area used to be about 0.6 acres. We've almost doubled that now to about an acre or so. One thing you'll note too, in the original PDA, G6 was planned out as 2 buildings. We've actually merged this as 1. We think this is a better use of the open space to achieve this greater open green space that you'll see. A little more detail to that. The original plan, Master Harbor Plan, required 50% open space, 50% building coverage. We're pleased to say today we've exceeded that. We are providing about 58% open space with a total increase of about 8.2%. We should know at this point that the project at this point does not request any more square footage than that has been agreed to with the PDA. So in addition to the large green space, the planning of our buildings really is trying to integrate other parts of open spaces. And what this diagram shows is that there is this network of spaces and desire lines and paths that creates this porosity that is very important, I think, from inland to the water. So today, our planning, the ground floor is this slide here. You'll note that the Fort Point Park zone in our portion of the site is shown right now as kind of a blank green slate, right? So there's really just trees and grass. We are working in parallel with the BPDA and Saki's master planning for that. They are recommending programming pieces, which we're literally going through as of this week, and we'll be integrating those concepts into our design. What you see in the orange yellow are all facilities of public accommodation, another word for retail or community space. So what's notable is that all buildings are seen as accessible from 360 degrees. There's no front or back to these buildings. The streets we're planning would be continuing Necco Street, existing across from the 15 Necco Street project down to the south is page left, to Binford Street, would be terminating Binford Street and creating a new open space park along this area to the pump house. G6 is important because we're creating a publicly accessible pathway through the building. And so people can come through the building, enjoy the future retail there, come across Necco through this pedestrian alleyway that's shared with cars and trucks that service both the G4 residential building, G5, which is office, and G6, which is lab. Resiliency is a big driver for the decisions we're making, as why we're here. As Bud noted, this was the city's plan to build this berm to facilitate resiliency against sea level rise. The diagram on the right was part of that early planning, showing a very technical engineering solution to mitigate that with future sea level rise. So we're using this as our guiding principle, but when you look at this, it may solve an engineering problem, but it creates another problem because it's creating a barrier to the water. So our design integrates this berm into the landscape by creating, with the shaded area, a gradual slope. So as we stand on this future Fort Point Park, the land starts to rise very, very gently, maybe about 2% or so, up to a high point marked by this red line, which is our line of defense. And that is the high point at the 21.5 Boston City base elevation that meets that sea level rise future level in terms of defense against the water. So that line of defense would continue down across to the south of the Gillette parcel. They will be responsible for their portion, as to the north, as our neighbors to the north and beyond are doing as well. And so today, the harbor walk, you all know, has this very curious shape around this outfall pipe. What we will be doing is we will be retaining that shape and maintaining that pathway along this notch seawall. And so that would still be a very accessible portion to get to the water. So this is an early sketch of what that might look like. G4 is a residential building, G5 is office. We would have a very large plaza on our property. Stepping down, this will be fully accessible with ramps at proper grades, handrails, etc., down to this harbor walk, which would kind of hug this notch in this at the outfall pipe area. So in section, what this is today, Some technical numbers here in terms of the existing harbor walk is about 14 to 16 feet, depending where you cut the section. And this is our vision for the future. This is looking south. The Fort Point Park is to the left. This would be our residential building and the office building beyond. And so we're envisioning a series of cascading steps, maybe almost an amphitheater at one point, which ties in some of Sasaki's planning, and expanding that portion of the harbor walk with some ideas that the Sasaki has presented, that perhaps there's a stage or a floating barge that we'll see later. But the bottom line is that this is now raising that land up to meet that sea level rise and protect the whole district from stormwater surges.
Andrew, I think it's important to also note, if you go back to that slide, part of what we're also suggesting is that if you noticed here, we've got under the proposed harbor walk that we anticipate elevating that as well when we rebuild it to 16.5 from its current 14.75, which will give even the harbor walk some additional protection. And the intent is that the design of this will be, as time advances and water levels increase, the harbor walk will be, we will be able to elevate that harbor walk relatively easily to tie into the berm at different points. So it's an important aspect of what the design is going to be, and certainly this is being, contemplated within the Sasaki design as well.
Great. So when we look at the public realm, we take a bird's eye view of the streetscape. This is a map of showing a major component of the city, which is the South Bay Harbor Trail. And this bike path right now kind of hugs the harbor walk, but it meets the impediment here with the stairs up to the Summer Street elevation change. And so the future build out would envision as if part of the 100-acre master plan is implemented with a future extension of streets to the east, that cycle track would actually continue through our site to connect with West Service Road to points east. And so this is an overlay showing that potential South Bay Harbor Trail that connects from Ruggles all the way to the Fan Pier. We have worked closely with the BPDA, especially Boston Transportation and Traffic, to integrate that trail as a dedicated bike path. So this is a dedicated protected zone separate from cars along Necco Street. Along Wormwood Extension, we should note we've evolved Wormwood Extension to be bikes and pedestrians only, so no cars connecting this piece of the parcel from Necco to A Street. So the idea that this bike path will continue to points east down across the future, across the postal service site. Just some thoughts on treescapes and greenscapes, some pocket parks that you probably well know in this neighborhood. Just thinking high level in terms of how these open spaces as they morph along the street are all marked by robust trees. So we would continue that same concept. This green swath is that whole Fort Point Park. And even within our parcel, we have these small pocket parks for more intimate spaces. In terms of programming and massing, we noted G4 is residential, 5 is office, and purple, G6 is, the purple is life science. So we think this is a nice mix of programmed mixed uses that would complement this neighborhood. In terms of massing, this is the 100-acre PDA plan with the original planning with the tunnel. You can see in the dashed pink lines with these heights. G3 is the 15 Necco parcel. So with these heights, we have evolved this to achieve greater open space by raising G5 and G6 slightly. Here's some statistics here that is all available publicly. We can review this later in detail if you wish again, but really capping off G4 at 17 stories, 13 and 8 stories for the lab.
So it's important to note that from an FAR standpoint, we are not asking for any additional FAR over and above what is part of the part of the original planning.
And so part of that strategy is how do we move from the 100-acre plan to where we are today? And so when we look at the G4, G5 parcels from the water side, the thinking is that G4 parcel being residential, this block shape that was planned out 20 plus years ago is not the most conducive for a contemporary residential building in terms of how that lays out. So we've borrowed some of that area from the G4 parcel, placed at the G5 parcel. By doing so, we are actually not building about 47,000 square feet between the two parcels. And what this results in, we think, is a better massing approach to improving view corridors, especially up Binford and through Fort Point Park. And so we don't have this large barrier or mass blocking inland residents from the skyline view. So this is an early version of what this vision is. Again, the green space is this blank slate ready to be designed and discussed, as already been kicked off as of last night. G6 being the life sciences building in the front, G4 Resi, and G5 office. So the character of the building is taken from cues within the city. I think this is an area you well know. There's a lot of brick and detail with stone. I think our architects, KPF, has done an amazing job interpreting history, but not making it Disneyland, just trying to interpret this in a modern way. And so part of that is also coloration. I think Boston enjoys a palette of different colors of brick, which gives it that richness and character, and from buffs to beiges to terracottas and reds. And so with that strategy, we'll be employing that onto our buildings. So this is a rendering from A Street and Binford Street. 249A is right here on the right. And so this is the one half of this G6 Life Sciences building. We're picking up cues for datum lines, proportions of windows, details, trying to add a richness to the building so they fit into the character. We're modifying the building to step back to create scale by adding these terraces within the building. As we swing around at A Street, 249 is to the left, the park is to the right. This is showing the widened A Street as part of that widening process. And so this is the front, what we call the head house of the G6 Life Science building. So we're walking underneath the G6 building. This column is a nod to that corner column at 249 A Street. And so what this is this allows for greater depth of public realm within the sidewalk. Otherwise, we'd be building right up to the building, which just narrows down that street sidewalk a bit. So we turn the corner around G6. We're now facing that future park. And then here we are on the north side of that, the park to the right, 50 Necco beyond. This is that dedicated bike lane we mentioned. So there's park side, sidewalk, tree zone, bike lane, dedicated cafe zone, and sidewalk along the north side of G6. Spinning around, we now are looking back towards the G6 Life Sciences building. Again, one of these pocket park areas. Perhaps there's art, there's water, some other features. Stepping across to the north, across this park, this almost 1 acre park, G6 in front of us. And part of the breakdown of the scale is this introduction of terraces within the building to chop up that verticality. Along New Necco Street, park to the left, here you can see clearly the two different characters of this building with the glass and terracotta fins and then the brick beyond. This is now on the Harbor Walk. We're looking with the water behind us, looking back to this alleyway split between the residential building on the left, the office building on the right. We think this is a nice amenity that will open up this part of the site to create a lot of ground level uses. Another view of that park, G4 in front of us and the Harbor Walk to the right. Sustainability, won't dwell on this too long, but obviously we're meeting a lot of the current code requirements and exceeding that in terms of how we're going to achieve reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and improve performance overall. Site improvements, if you remember that slide with the hardtop, the 810 parking spaces, There's a lot of opportunity here to create pervious open space through landscaping and different treeways in terms of making sure the trees are going to be survivable. And just some thoughts from Halverson architects, our landscape architects, in terms of how to make those trees sustainable. They were, by note, landscape designers for the Channel Center A Street Park, as well as the Government Center Plaza in front of the T stop there. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Steve. I can talk more about ground floor use.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. So one of the things we just wanted to go over is that, you know, we've got a strong history of, you know, in all of our buildings in Boston, we typically have on the ground floor a significant amount of what we would call public spaces, and facilities of public accommodation by definition are areas that, you know, have to be open to the public. And, you know, one of the projects that we're very proud of that we've executed is really the Converse building and Lovejoy Wharf, which really is, you see that on the far two right pictures here. Another one that's going to be coming is in Kenmore Square, which is a hugely active area underneath the Citgo sign that we will also be, we're in the process of developing. It's under construction now. So if we look at, you know, some of the lessons learned and some of the history relative to Lovejoy, I think the next picture kind of denotes, many of you, I'm sure, remember what our great city's kind of first, you know, impression it made from anyone coming from the north over the Zakim Bridge was this. This was a building that was in a continuous state of disrepair for probably, you know, 30 years. And, you know, was many different developers all took shots at trying to make this work. And finally, you know, we probably got lucky with timing, but also, you know, had I think the vision and the ability to kind of bring this back. So this was really an end to the Harbor Walk. At this point, it was dangerous. You could not walk here. There was literally yellow police tape in front of many of these areas. You can see the condition of, you know, essentially the entire waterfront here was collapsing. The basements of these buildings were tidal basements. They were flooding so much with seawater. The building on the right essentially had to be torn down. It was unsalvageable as it had gone beyond a condition of repair. And the building on the left was almost there, but we were able to restore it. And we added, you know, a new element to the top, which we think was very attractive. And we brought in Converse, which was a great tenant for this location, given the fact that it's adjacent to, you know, to the Fleet Center at that time. And, you know, since then is now, you know, we all know it as the Boston Garden. Let's just admit it. So really key here is that all of these spaces were Chapter 91. So the recreation of the Harbor Walk and the extension of it back now to essentially the Boston Garden and facilities of public accommodation along the ground floor. We brought in Night Shift, which was a brewery that has done a terrific job there, both internal and then now external. There is a terrific restaurant that's also at this location. There is a facility of public accommodation. This was kind of one of the lessons learned. There was a community space, a civic space that unfortunately is still unused at this location. And one of the things that we think about with civic spaces, and I know the BPDA does as well, is we want to make sure that we're simply not saying, okay, let's meet a numeric requirement. Let's really think about what is going to activate the area? What does the neighborhood really need? What is the type of civic space that is going to be necessary and utilized? Because nothing is worse than just having kind of open retail that sits vacant and unused. So, that is one of the lessons learned here, as well as obviously executing, through all of the public agencies and completing a fairly significant portion of the Harbor Walk here. So we're proud of this. It's a great project and one that really the city is benefiting from now as opposed to what it was. Next. Oh, by the way, the other thing that we added here, if you go back, is we actually included a water shuttle. We have an on-water facility here in which we're now able to provide water shuttle service to the seaport area from Lovejoy, which means that people that are from the north that are working in the seaport don't have to fight another half hour of traffic through the city, causing additional congestion. They can walk over from North Station, jump on a shuttle that's operating, multiple times a day, and go over to Fan Pier. Now, in addition to Fan Pier, we're in discussions to extend that service beyond and out to the outer seaport, given the interest and additional development that's happening in the Marine Industrial Park and areas, further east of Fan Pier. So that's really been a great public-private partnership that has been engaged with the MBTA, with BTD, as well as private stakeholders in the seaport and here with us. So a real good execution. Next slide. So another small project that we have, which really shows a lot of what we like to do with neighborhood areas, is this is essentially a new hotel that we've constructed essentially on Charles Street in Beacon Hill. The hotel is the Whitney. It's actually recently was a Condé Nast award winner as one of the top small hotels in Boston. What's really critical, though, is also the garage and the execution of the retail. We love local businesses that are providing a real high quality kind of service to the neighborhood. And so when you look at these retailers along Charles Street, they just fit, with the neighborhood. And we're not, trying to get every last dollar of retail rent out of a location. And we're not trying to, get the highest level of credit, with national chains and so on. What we really are looking for is what's the highest quality of kind of contextual, kind of design and contextual uses that the neighborhood is going to benefit from. And so when we look at this kind of array of uses along it, we've got Savinor's, which is a terrific grocer that's providing locally grown and locally accessed products to this market. We've got a community animal clinic, which we know that, Beacon Hill has got, a lot of people that love their pets. And this is a location that they can actually have medical service and other requirements for their pets. There is a JP Licks ice cream, a local purveyor, Pacifico Bakery, which is a great sandwich shop and so on. And this is the kind of thing that we want to bring, quite frankly, to Channelside. We're not going to be looking for, the national credit necessarily tenant. We're looking to try to provide the types of facilities of public accommodation which will add value to the neighborhood, which will create a location that is essentially going to draw people from the park into our public realm such that they're interchangeable, you know, and is not perceived as, oh, well, here's the private section and here's the public section. We want that to be a, you know, an inviting and area that really folks from the park in an equitable basis can afford to come, bring their families and engage with the retailers that are going to be located there. Next slide. Just some other pictures. For example, in Kenmore Square, there was a group called Cornwalls, which is really in that neighborhood, has been there for years and years, and has been a you know, just a tremendous pub restaurant at this Kenmore location. We got to know the owners of Cornwalls. We really appreciated them, and we said, you know what? We're going to let you close without. We're going to rebuild the building. We're going to bring you back into this location, and that's what's happened today. And through the pandemic, where people have needed help, we've decided it's in our best interest. It's in the best interest of the investors of the project. It's in the best interest of the city to provide that assistance to these people, to allow them to continue to stay open and to continue to operate. And when this is all over, come back in full force and effect. And so that's the kind of landlord. And really, we think it's actually in the best interest of investors as well. So we're aligned with both the neighborhood, you know, with the investors as well as the retailers to try to produce, you know, a quality environment. Fitness is also an area that we like, and we like doing, you know, we actually don't have that slide, so we can keep going. We had to, because we're doing a lot here, we had to kind of curtail to some degree. So when we look at now shifting to channel side, what do we have available to us? So these areas are really the facilities of public accommodation. We have to meet a percentage requirement. We've got plus or minus about 50,000 feet. You know, these buildings are still shifting, you know, in minor ways, as obviously we are informed as we go through these continued updates, you know, with stakeholders in the area. But as of today, this is kind of where we're at. We've got the residential areas on the park. We've got the office building, which wraps around, and these can be divided into any size or square footage. We've got access directly. They'll be handicap accessible. The way we're operating by elevating the entire site, as opposed to essentially having the buildings, you know, there, we're able to provide resiliency and handicap accessibility at the same time to these ground floor uses. Where we are below, you know, the 21.5 at these entrances, we will have deployable. And that essentially will be to the areas on the other side of Necco Street, the A Street side of Necco, where these ground floor uses want to be essentially at the elevation that is there. There'll be deployable barriers that in the area, in the time of a flood, will ensure that water does not infiltrate, you know, into these facilities. So we think that there is a tremendous opportunity to bring those kinds of uses that we just talked about here to channel side, whether it be, and I think we go to the next slide, which we start to think about. So let's talk about kind of civic space and what we're thinking about. Community centers, we've heard voting. You know, there's really no area for people to vote. And we've also heard a very interesting thought about a branch library. When you think about the amount of development that has occurred in the Seaport, and now also in Fort Point, and in those combined areas, you know, there has been a significant volume, and yet there is not, you know, there's not schools, there isn't, you know, a library that's expanded there. We also understand that there is the need for for some emergency services capabilities at some point that has to be provided. You know, one of the things that we like is the thought of a branch library here. And one of the reasons we like that is for a couple of reasons. First of all, we think administratively, libraries are well run, they're well operated, and they meet the needs of the constituency in that neighborhood. Libraries have changed significantly in terms of their uses over time. Today, they're much more digitally oriented. They provide services that people are looking for in terms of touchdown locations for senior citizens, for active adults, for young adults, and they provide educational opportunities for children. We think that all of those things are really well needed and would be well used in the Fort Point neighborhood that we're located. We think that a library would also be an area in which you could have, you know, voting stations, where you could have community centers and public meetings in this facility. So we are working with, and will be working with the BPD, the Boston Public Library, as well as city government and constituents here to see if this really can have legs. We'd like to think about this in a more specific, detailed way, but we think that right now that this opportunity is one that we'd like to pursue. So keep going from civic uses. You know, now we talk about, you know, other uses that are going to be made available here. One of the things that we certainly think is important is that we need to recognize the fact that the Fort Point Channel historically has been an amazing location for the arts. You know, for local craftsmen who have come to this location, have been a part of this neighborhood for years and years, have really formed and shaped this neighborhood in a very positive way. And we want to celebrate that. We want to bring that to our community as well, which our community is your community. They're all one. So artisans and art oriented kind of space, both from the standpoint of craftsmen actually working studio areas, as well as galleries, we expect to be part of our development, and we think will actually draw people from the park as an additional asset and give a lot of positive things for people to do and to engage, while also engaging local artists from the neighborhood as well as others from outside of the Fort Point area to enrich this heritage. Next. You know, these are some inspirational images as to the kinds of things that we want to bring, not, you know, large kind of traditional retailers, but in fact, uses that are needed, that are positive, that are locally driven, you know, where you have a relationship with that purveyor, which is personal and positive. We think that Boston is loaded with this type of heritage, and something that we think we can bring to the Fort Point and to our development at Channelside. Certainly, you know, the bicycles are here to stay. It's a healthy, positive way of moving around the city. We have spent a tremendous amount of time working with the BPDA and BTD on developing bicycle trails through our facility that are protected, that will be well utilized. And so it's a natural to have a bike repair shop or a bike station here, as well as having tremendous, you know, bike facilities for our tenants upstairs to enjoy and engage and allow for their employees who are going to, in our opinion, want to travel to work in you know, either by walking or by bicycle in a greater and greater number over time. And so we are creating facilities that will allow for that. Obviously, great eateries that meet the demand of a variety of people that are also not necessarily just high-end restaurants where a family of 5 would never consider going. We want places that, and I think we can go to the next slide as well, in which, you know, people that are enjoying and visiting the park will end up coming over to. Some of these are examples of places that we've created and been involved with already. Friendly Toast in the lower right-hand corner is near and dear to my heart. Unfortunately, it's now closed. We haven't owned this particular property in quite some time, but we found this group up in New Hampshire, and they are in Cambridge at 1 Kendall Square, and are just this amazing kind of 24-hour breakfast, lunch, and dinner location, you know, that was really eclectic, really interesting, really unique, affordable, and was a destination for people. We also see Night Shifts Brewery and their interior location here at Lovejoy Wharf was a great for both kind of an entertainment venue, but also food and beverage. And then obviously great bakeries and shops are all part of the mix. Finally, kind of the next one is, you know, you're right next to a park. There's going to be people that are going to be here in, we hope, in significant numbers. We got to have a great ice cream location at Channel Side, no question. And we'll be looking for that so that families have a place to go and integrate with the art exhibits, with the other retailers that we have, as well as enjoy an ice cream with their kids. So what are the next steps? Really, I think there is still a lot of involvement in terms of determining this, you know, these facilities of public accommodation. Sasaki is actually going to be coming out with master plan recommendations that also include recommendations for the facilities of public accommodation. We will obviously take a lot of cues there. The IAG, which is continuing to meet, will also be engaged in that process. The PNF comment period is still open. And so, you know, all of the comments from the public relative to what they want to see here will be taken into account. And so we look at all of that and we, you know, integrate that into our thoughts. And, you know, we've given you kind of the thoughts to date that we're thinking about and look forward to continuing that process. So now let's kind of shift to Watersheet Activation, which is another area that, you know, we have the great privilege and also the great responsibility of developing on what is today a tremendously underused asset here in Boston, and that is this amazing sheet of water. You know, it was originally designed as an industrial location, which in the Industrial Revolution was necessary, you know, to transport materials, goods, and services to and from industrial facilities that were located along it. It was also used and continues to be used, but in a very responsible way, to cool and to use the water that was from this facility to cool plants and to allow for the development of industrial areas, which Gillette has most recently and continues to be engaged with, and is a very important manufacturer here within the city of Boston. They've done it in an incredibly responsible way, and this channel is now, I don't know to what degree, Bud could probably tell us, but significantly cleaner than it's ever been, and that will only continue. Therefore, the use of this channel for recreational and public use now becomes a reality as this area develops. And today, and up until now, it's been bordered by the US Post Office on one hand and Gillette on the other, which were not the most, you know, kind of accessible, you know, locations. It was either parking lots or industrial type buildings. That's going to change over time. We're beginning that change. 15 NECO is beginning that change. we anticipate that that change will continue over time to a point in which at one point the city of Boston will have this amazing water sheet that will be surrounded by facilities that will be porous in nature and will allow the public to gain tremendous access to this area. So our responsibility is to start that really well. And the BPDA knows it, the planning that's gone into this, and I think we can look at the next slide, has really incorporated that going back, years and years, which I have to give a tremendous amount of credit. When you read this May 2002 Watersheet Activation, plan, it's really incredibly relevant today, still, some 18 years later. And that's tremendous that we have this as a starting point from which to go. And that's really what we're using as our basis of now, how do we pick and choose which aspects of this to be executed here at this location? That's the important part. So first of all, the critical element is getting people from the land to the frontage on the water and providing them with an access point, a harbor walk that is inviting and interesting, and with facilities of public accommodation on that water sheet that they want to come to, that draws them there, that they can access, and that is equitable for all, not just a few, not just the neighbors of this location, but in fact, people from around the city, all to enjoy this facility. So, another element of planning, I think if we go to the next slide, that has more recently been engaged, which really talks about how we not only provide access and ensure, great use, but also mitigation. One of the things that they didn't consider in 2002 was the fact that we were going to have continued seawater rise. And that seawater rise was going to imperil, many of our neighborhoods over time, and not in the far distant future. As we know, this area, our particular property, is already, been compromised by extreme tides and storm conditions. So the reality is that we've now got to develop an additional element in here, which is this concept of protection. And the way to do it is provide a physical barrier to the water, elevate the shoreline to a point that the water does not infiltrate inland. So how do we do that responsibly? And this is one of the plans that has started to provide that. There is the grant that was issued, by the way. That grant is not just for the Gillette site. That grant incorporates all the way onto our property. And now 15 NECO is also engaging in that transition. It was perfect for the city to start there because you had one property owner in Gillette that controlled a very significant length of area along the channel, which was also happened to be an area that was being compromised and therefore a priority. So, this is now being executed. The BPDA will be announcing, we hope very recently, kind of a successful grant application with the next stages of increasing the design. And obviously we are engaged with the BPDA as well as with what will be the EPA and our neighbors on both sides to ensure that this is integrated. I mean, one of the things that we are not going to do is cause other people problems because of the work that we do. And so we need to do this in a way that is responsible, that understands how, from an engineering perspective, water is going to be moving as, as we essentially protect this particular area. And I think the great news is that we have an opportunity to do this because Gillette is motivated. We've got the 15 NECO partner that is motivated on our other side, and as well, obviously on our site, we're going to be building it into our development. And it's a lot better for us to build it into the development than to have developed and then have to do it later. So we're in a particularly good position, and the timing of it all seems to be fitting together nicely. We also took from that a lot of other locations, not just the city of Boston, but in fact, Watersheet Activation, engaging with the water is something that everyone does. And a lot of people have done it really, really well in different locations with different issues. One of the things, that we've looked at is in the city of New York, the Hudson River Park, the Chicago River Walk, Toronto waterfront, Oslo, Copenhagen, I know is one of a favorite for a lot of people. So we've looked at all of these. KPF is kind of a world-renowned designer and architect. Halverson Design has been engaged nationally and internationally, and we've taken lessons learned from a number of different groups, as has Sasaki, as has the BPDA. And so we hope to bring this great thinking together to really produce something that is sustainable, that is long-term, and that is excellent. To kind of nod to the Sasaki process. So this is actually really some of the uses that we're thinking about relative to Watersheet Activation. I was particularly engaged with and thought about these water bikes, having seen them, in Perth, Australia, and how much fun and interesting they were, and what an interesting way of getting around. And you can do so while staying dry. The water is certainly calm enough in the channel to do that. So that's something that we are investigating as a point. Obviously, public art, which in the upper left-hand corner has continued to be part of the Fort Point channel, and we see that as ongoing and continuing. We have heard that one of the needs in order to execute public art, in an effective, continuous, sustainable way is we need locations, in order to actually create that art. And so we're thinking about that. Another thing we're thinking about is events, big events around the channel that draw people to it, that create more importance here. And so we look at, Water Fire in Providence, Rhode Island. And this was a recommendation from stakeholders through our meetings that we should be engaged in developing, a group, form a committee that would be engaged in bringing this type of event to Boston around the channel. And that can happen not only in the good weather, but also in the winter. We're a hardy group. We enjoy our outdoor activity, whether it's winter or summer. And so let's bring a winter activity to the channel in which artwork can be displayed around, in, and on the channel, 12 months a year at certain times. So we certainly are looking at all of this and thinking about the channel's activation in these ways. And I think that might wrap up our presentation for today. So thank you very much, and we look forward to answering any and all questions that you may have.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Andrew. Welcome back, Bud. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, and I see that Susan has her hand up. Susan, I'm going to give you a second to either keep your hand up, in which I will call on you, or you can put your hand down if you do not have a question. Okay. I'm seeing people has hands up and hands down again. If you do have a question, you can put your hand up or put it in the Q&A. Again, the hand up feature is in participants. You just click and then you click to put your own hand up. The first question is actually not specifically about your site, but Tom asks, about, you said the North Station Ferry is expanding to other sections. Could you comment on what other docks are under consideration?
Yes, hi, Tom. So there is a location that is out at the end of the Marine Industrial Park on the other side of the dry dock. Unfortunately, this picture will not show that, but it's essentially the far east area. If you think about the Innovation and Design Building, which is 1.5 million square feet of space, it's basically a high rise on its side. And you think about the Silver Line, which is servicing it today, and the fact that the Silver Line is leaving, prior to the pandemic, was leaving people at the gate, if you will, at South Station. It was, despite the fact that it was is a tremendous asset, it was inundated. And so the idea was, okay, we're providing from Fort Point to Fan Pier. The next location was kind of going to be all the way out on the far eastern area so that individuals can filter down from that into the Marine and Innovation Design Building, into other buildings that are actually growing within the Marine Industrial Park, which has a significant amount of land and will be developed. And then, you know, from there, you know, I can see another stop located in the Liberty Wharf area, which is kind of an intermediate location. And what's interesting, Tom, is a lot of this is being driven by, which I think is great, by private sector in conjunction with the public sector, meaning the private sector is funding the studies, is funding the development of these facilities. For example, we put, as part of our mitigation for Lovejoy, in the construction of a commuter and basically a dock there and a connection point, which was for a specific type of boat that allowed for, you know, a significant number of passengers to be on it, something like 30 to 35 front end. And then, and the boat, by the way, tremendously successful to Fan Pier, basically fully loaded all of the time when it's in use and operation. So that's the current thinking, is that it's going out to the end, and where, you know, the next stop is I think is going to be, we're hitting the tip of the iceberg relative to finally utilizing the waterfront as a means in which to move people around.
Great, thank you. Kathy Kathy notes, thanks for picking up on the branch library. The combination of a new park and a branch library are the two most significant, exciting, and democratic contributions of civic space possible. I guess the follow-up question to that is, you have several different, portions of G4 and G5 and G6 that you've said, you know, this could be retail, or this could be, you know, these are the possible ground floor spaces. Do you have a sense of where you'd prefer to have different kinds of spaces set up, or have you said that this one in particular is your preferred civic space?
I think, you know, based on the current thinking, what we would like is, we think that this A Street location makes sense for a civic space, for a library, because it's going to be the most kind of publicly accessible right off of A Street, which is a significant area where you've got lots of traffic and where the most people can gain access to it. So that's our thought. for now is that particular area. The one thing that we think is also interesting about it is we're investigating whether we can increase its size due to the fact that we've got very tall ceilings, on this first floor, and a library doesn't necessarily need really tall ceilings. So we also have, as we know, this is built over the tunnel, so we have limited amount of space underneath it, but we do have some. So to the extent that we're able to kind of land at street level at a vestibule point and then be able to go both up or down almost on a split level, we may be able to increase the size of this footprint by having it 2 floors within the same essential formation of the building. So we're looking at that. And also libraries need lots of space that doesn't necessarily have to have windows. They've got to have, kind of classroom areas. They've got to have storage for certain elements. They've got AV, capabilities and so on. So you would have, this upper floor that would be bright and have tremendous window lines and so on out into the community. But then you would also have kind of the back of house space underneath, which we think would be necessary.
Great. I will pause for a moment to let other people chime in. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature or directly into the chat if that's easier for you. One thing that I noticed is that there were several different proposals for the Harbor Walk itself in earlier slides, and it looks like you guys have decided that you are going to keep the notch. Do you have a sense of how you're going to be designing for or responding to times when that area is flooded? I know that there's sort of 2 elevations you're planning for. You've got the 21.5 and then the 16.5 for the Harbor Walk. How are you thinking through materials or operations to ensure that that area, even if it is inundated, can respond and bounce back quickly?
Well, we actually don't think it will be inundated for quite some time, if to the extent that we elevate it to the 16.5. But the reality is that it's an area which will be designed such that if it is inundated, as soon as the tide recedes, it'll be immediately usable again after a cleanup. The intent is that these will be, the types of materials which could withstand a flooding situation, without being adversely impacted.
Great. I think we'll be able to learn more from the Lango and Pueblo parks in the North End, right? I don't know if you're following along the construction of that. It's a similar elevation that's designed to be protected for now, and then over time there'll be changes. Right. Speaking of which, we have a follow-up question from Kathy asking about how you plan to continue to raise the Harbor Walk over time. So you alluded to the ability to, I don't know if are you elevating the 21.5 space or the Harbor Walk itself?
No, I think the 21.5 is the elevation that is the, I think it's and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, the number that the city has determined based on, their technical study of, essentially a 2070 kind of
that's correct,
of protection level. And so, that's the standard. And the bottom line is that as you see these, and one of the things that I think, look, the Sasaki plan, I believe, was unveiled last night to the public, their recommendations. And one of them was this kind of amphitheater, in which you've got a gradient change moving up, right? And so, the obvious way that the Harbor Walk simply is protected and is increased is it gets built up. Over time it rises. We build it up to the extent that, it's no longer at at, 16.5, it goes to, then goes to 17.5, it goes to 19, it goes to whatever it needs to. And, it's certainly, the kind of underlaying essential construction here would allow for that to just happen naturally over time as necessary, in order to keep it as a functional, harbor walk that people can enjoy. And we believe that will continue to be a priority of the city, and that will happen.
Great. We've got another library question from someone. They say, it looks like the A Street FPA space is divided. Would the entire space potentially be used as a library? I believe the earlier meetings, it was mentioned to be around 6,000 square foot. So even if 2 floors, it would be 12,000 max. Wouldn't a library need more space?
No, this is not meant to be a, like the Boston Public Library. This is a branch library, serving this particular area. And we think that the square footage would be sufficient and appropriate for that use. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of discussions with Boston Public Library, with the city. There is the build out. There is apparently some public money that's available for that. And we'll be investigating that as well. But we think that this would be 10,000, 12,000 feet is a lot more than you think when you're looking at it. And so we think that it would be sufficient.
Great, thank you. We don't have any more questions coming in right now, so I will say to the people in the audience, I'm putting in a link in the chat to the BPDA's website for this project. There's a public comment period that closes on Friday, so if you have comments on this project that you want to submit, the first round of comments is due Friday, but this is like all projects built on the waterfront, something that will go through many different rounds of processes. It will go through the city's Article 80 process, as well as the state's MEPA process and Chapter 91. Chapter 91 is the law that governs how people can build along the waterfront. So it includes things like the allowance for the harbor walk, as well as facilities of public accommodation that we keep referring to as FPA spaces. So we hope that you'll stay tuned into this project and continue to share your thoughts throughout. I really want to thank Steve and Andrew for joining us today. If you are not following along with Boston Harbor Now's work, you can sign up for our emails at bostonharbornow.org. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, though I'm not sure you'll find Harbor Use Forums on our Instagram, but you'll definitely find them on Twitter and Facebook. At our next virtual Harbor Use Forum in November, we will hopefully hear back from the BPDA again about that Sasaki open space plan so that those two things can get married. So there's the Sasaki open space plan that will then be turned over to the related Beal team, and they'll give Halverson the go-ahead green light to take what are now these Fort Point parks that are grass with trees and enhance them to have an even more of that public realm design that people have been contributing to if you've been part of that 100-acre open space plan. Any final words from you guys, Andrew, Steve?
Just thank you and look forward to your continued involvement. And thank you, Alice, and everyone from Boston Harbor Now. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We'll see you soon.
Just want to restate that. Thank you. And thanks for all the great questions too.